of Topiwala National Medical College in Bombay. And so he had that job. And before that job, he was offered to be the dean at King Edward Memorial, which is KEM Hospital, which is a prestigious place from which he had gone to med school and graduated from, to be the dean there. But he wanted to be dean of Topiwala because he felt he could build into the place and upgrade it and, bring it up to certain different standards. So he joined there, and that was his mission, to widen the horizons and to bring about some newer developments. And it started, I don't understand, I was a younger person then, exactly what the curriculum had changed, etc. But I do know him taking me around to show me how he had built the hostels for the students to live in. And it was a beautiful ground, and every door had a different color that I thought was very unique. And he said, I like to do these things. So I remember that as a child. So, then, of course, I was in high school doing senior Cambridge in Bombay. My younger sisters are considerably younger than me. So the middle one is 9 years younger, and the third one is 12 years younger than I am. So in 1962, I was in doing my senior Cambridge, the 11th grade. And that's, I guess, around that time or slightly before, Cardinal Gracious requested a meeting with my dad and asked him whether he would be willing to be the first dean of the proposed Catholic Medical College, the first of its kind in India. And my dad came back home, and I guess he was very discreet. He never really discussed openly things with us kids around. So he must have discussed with my mother, and she felt it was okay, that it was a calling, and they were willing to undertake the task, understanding the risks. So then they told us that, I was the oldest, I guess the younger two didn't quite understand, that they had to move to Bangalore in order to start the groundwork for starting St. John's Medical. At the same time, Cardinal Gracious approached the administrator, Willie Saldana, who was at that time, you must know Willie Saldana's family. He was working in Delhi, and he was a well-respected person, to be the administrator. So those were the two key persons that were chosen, I would assume simultaneously, and with good forethought, because they could work together to establish how the new place was going to start from a medical and an administrative point of view. So that left me in the dark, because I was in the last year of senior Cambridge. So my mother actually was very enthusiastic about moving. So she arranged with me to stay with a classmate of mine, a good friend of my dad's from med school, not too far from our house. So for a year, I stayed with them, two girls. One was a year senior to me and 1 year junior to me. And in their tiny apartment, they made me quite welcome and treated me like one of the kids. So I finished senior Cambridge there in Bombay, in Clare Road. And then I went to Bangalore because my parents had already moved in 62. My younger sister remembers she was 4 years old at the time, and she was going to enter preschool in Bangalore. So you can imagine, for her and my other sister, growing up in Bangalore was the life they knew. For me, it was life in Bombay, which was an abrupt change to Bangalore. But it was okay. It was an adjustment socially, language-wise and culturally, much different than what I had experienced in Bombay. But I was willing to do that. So I went to Mount Carmel College for a year, and then decided that I preferred to go to med school in Bombay to be with my friends. And my mother said, you should try for St. John's because, it has the right Catholic background, the right ethical thing that all doctors need, and altruism, and so on and so forth. So I said, well, okay, I'll apply for it. And that's how I applied. And when I saw the constructs of, the mission of the med school, it wasn't surprising to me that my father and mother had willingly chosen to accept that path, because all my life I recognized them as the most together couple that complemented each other. Whatever my father's mission was, my mother was willing to support it. And they were an absolutely beautiful Catholic family unit. We had a lot of friends, and my father didn't mind anybody. He was completely open to all kinds of religions, friends. It made no difference, relatives, whoever side of the family it was on, doesn't matter. Everybody was welcome, and my mother too. So I grew up in a house that was, largely embracing of differences in people and accepting them and enjoying them. So now it came to just a different city in which we had to have the same attitude. And that didn't change with my parents. They remained the same. And I think my memories, of course, were 60 years ago, and it was different because I was 16 or 17 when I came, and I was busy immersed in, the pre-university degree with in getting the good grades to get into med school, and then trying for med school. So a lot of it was just focused on, academic work and getting through that so that I could achieve whatever goal I had to. So, but my experiences were, it was a really different place, Bangalore. It was beautiful visually, different, as I say, culturally, but ultimately was accepting. So that's the story behind when we just landed. My sisters went to the local Good Shepherd convent, and they were very happy there. Then I finished my PPC, which is the first year of med school, and joined the class. And then I recognized, my dad said, are you really going to do the job of a physician? So, because otherwise the seat is wasted. And I said, no, I will practice, because it was not uncommon in that era for women in medicine to do medicine and then just drop out after they got married and didn't really often practice when, the college had invested in them, training them. So that was his concern. And with that in mind, I understood the class of 50 has 35 boys, 7 women, 7 nuns. And in some classes, there were 1 brother. And the reason for that is to, absolutely to promote the mission of St. John's. So that was to serve the underserved. And the life of the nuns, where they devoted their careers and their lives to taking care of the indigent and underserved, and, with great love and humility. So theirs was going to be a dedicated career, and the hope was the 7 of us who are not nuns would do likewise. And of course, the thrust was to encourage more Catholics to join, and so it was given, favored Catholic applications with the same idea that you spread what Christ taught us. It's a mission in which you help people, well, irrespective of their level in life. So, there were a few non-Catholics, and I would say it was probably more competitive for them because, the Catholics were given preference. But it's not to say that it was easy to get in. And at the same time, my dad wanted to make sure we were all entering on a level playing. So one thing was to have the scores that you achieved in your graduation from college. And also the second thing was unusual to me was the psychological testing that was that we had to do as students. Now, that was distinctly different. And there was a basis for that, because I have to say that my dad was different than the run-of-the-mill physicians, in that his thinking was different. He was very open-minded. So I remember in 1956, he went as a Rockefeller, he was a Rockefeller Fellow, and he visited the United States for 4 months, visiting various universities, including Yale and Harvard, and some in the South. And I and my sister, that my middle sister, the youngest one, wasn't born, stayed with my grandmother in India for those 4 months. And he learned, and he and the dean of the KEM hospital, and his wife and my mother, they all four went together, I think from September to December, and they visited various places, and my father was anxious to learn the differences in teaching formats from the British system, which was prevalent in India, where more or less you had learning by rote, I would say. And whereas the US system was more in semesters, more a different style of learning, maybe. So he had incorporated all of that in his thinking. And then later, he had visited also places like Holland. So it was an eye-opening thing for me when I joined. I finished PPC and I joined the first year of med school. And then I noticed the style that he had implemented in the college was different from the standard textbook that you read and by rote and then you recite or something like that. So this was a different style. It was more towards a little bit of research, I think. So there was on the board, bulletin board, say for anatomy, there were 3 or 4 textbooks with their title names given, physiology and biochemistry, whatever it is. So you read each textbook if you choose, and then you compare what you learned in one textbook versus another. At that time, we were not exposed to reading journals. But I still felt that it was different, that you could see where the authors had emphasis on some things or less emphasis on another when you read from different authors. So that was distinctly different. Then the other thing that we have a small class size, remember? We were now in the orphanage, housed in the orphanage, which was an open space, beautiful stone buildings, but small rooms, but completely clean and comfortable, with Dad and Mr. Saldana and all that having offices on one side, and the opposite side were classrooms and anatomy dissection, all done by the time I reached there. So I think the groundwork must have been done way before I reached in 62. But so everything was okay. Then the professors that he had chosen were not just anybody, but he had brought the anatomy professor, well-known professor, was also trained in abroad other than India, and a highly intellectual man and quite different in his style of teaching and very well respected. Then the chairman of physiology was an equally outstanding physiologist and a respected researcher. And him and his wife both had grants in which they were allowed to continue their grants on the facility site as well as teach. So they had a different style. Now they were researchers who were also teaching, like you would have in a university in this country. And then similarly with the biochemistry. Then we had local instructors and who were there too, equally well trained. But to this day, I had, that stuck in my mind, the quality of the selection of these special people to teach the basic sciences. And we had tests every Monday. So you kept up with the curriculum, and you didn't have to panic towards the end, and you were graded. So I thought it was a very nice thing to have. And then the anatomy, everything was perfect. There was no shortage of, the cadavers we had. It was like the place had been there forever. It was just so well organized. There was hardly any difficulty other than, unfortunately, the students had to stay in a less than perfect housing. But the boys, I think, managed to rough it out. The girls and the boys, they managed, and they, in retrospect, seem to have enjoyed the companionship of each other. So that was pretty good. And they had time for their extracurricular activities. I was not one for much sport, so I can't talk about it. But I certainly know that my classmates, and they played tennis or whatever other games, soccer, whichever was available to them. They had the opportunity of doing that. So I think that was the first year, which was very difficult, I would say, because there's a lot of it is ultimately rote. But we all did okay, and we graduated from the first year. And then comes the clinical years. So the clinical years, there was no St. John's Hospital of its own. So my father, whoever, collaborated, and by that time he had made many social connections with the Vice Chancellor of the University, V.L. D'Souza. He used to visit our home, and my father had great social skills, and his skill was listening. So he was a very good listener, and he managed to convince so many people, even retired, to help him. And so, he got support, and then he approached the nuns in St. Martha's, and it was a Catholic institution, so they offered their facility as the teaching hospital for us before the hospital was built. So I never was familiar with the St. John's Hospital, just being on the St. Martha's site. And it was very comfortable. The local physicians at St. Martha's were equally competent, very good teachers, very experienced. So we had a lot to learn from each one of them, whether it was medicine, surgery, gynecology, ophthalmology, forensic medicine, dermatology, whatever, the psychiatry, whatever it was. There was no shortcoming in the method of teaching. My father had also gone ahead and contacted, when he came, some of his colleagues that he was with in our hospital. So his close friend was Dr. Kothare, was his colleague as a pathologist in Bombay. So, and also a friend of his from med school. So he asked him whether he would be the pathologist at St. John's. And he consulted his wife, and they came from Bombay, they're Maharashtrians. And for them, those days, it was a big step to change and come to Bangalore, but he did so. And then my father also had a trusted administrative aide in Bombay, Mr. Hariharan, and he asked him whether he would come, and he came too. So just the three of them knew each other. Other than that, there was nobody else familiar. But it made a great difference because Dr. Kothare then worked with my dad and others to establish the Department of Pathology with extremely competent pathologists and also academic. And the surgeons my dad knew from one of his students at Noyers was a gifted surgeon, Alfred Mascarenhas, and he approached him. And his wife, Marie Mignon, was in preventive medicine. So he contacted him in England at the time. Alfred was in England, and he asked whether he would come and join St. John's. And they came. They stayed in our home for a little while they got settled, and then they moved. So I got to know Marie and Alfred. And then he chose Brigadier Naik because Brigadier Naik was well respected in the armed forces in Pune. So he was a great teacher, and he had also contacted other well established and highly respected clinicians to teach each of the subspecialties. So the other thing about my dad was that both he and my mother were extremely altruistic and realistic. They were using the funds frugally for the college. So we all three understood that a certain amount was needed for entertainment, having people over, connecting with them for the St. John's, which we understood and we did not object to at all as kids. It was part of our lives. But I think it was a good experience for me to recognize that there are things in life. It's part of being the Christian Catholic mentality is to give, and to give without hope of return. So this part of giving was what I had grown up with all my life, and the St. John's was just an extension of the same process. So I watched that, and to the extent that my father and Mr. Saldana would even share the ride to save on the gas to get from their homes to the new college when it opened. So it was, I watched all that and I had great respect for both of them because, Mr. Saldana had 5 kids and it was just, I'm sure it was a slightly tight budget, but they did it willingly. So in other words, they practiced what they preached, that the money was given for the education of the students and had to be used really for them and the other staff. So it was, you could be out of St. John's, I understood, and have a lucrative private practice, but then that would impact on your time you devoted to the teaching of students. So some people found that not palatable, and you could make a choice then whether you wanted to be on this service line and teaching with a less income or be out and have a better salary. So that was one of the things I believe was a source of contention, and rightly so, because not everybody can espouse to the same principles. But that being said, I think whoever worked there gave it their all. I have to say Dr. Mehta, the anatomist, the Sharma wife and husband were just, Kalyankar, the biochemistry, they were just so completely dedicated. Then my father also knew somebody, Dr. Rosario, who was interested in forensic medicine, and he contacted him. And he came and joined as the head of forensic medicine. So there were lots of people there that shared the same ideal. And so I think that enabled the students to be able to see that everybody had put their best foot forward and were doing everything so that the students could get the same facilities. And my father and mother were constantly involved also in fundraising because the hospital and the college didn't need assistance. So he started off by making an incentive for students to do well. And he contacted many of his friends in Bangalore that he had established and some others outside Bangalore and asked them to donate a certain amount of money for prize money for the best student that had achieved in each subject or the entire training. So each one of them had their names and they had given money to create prizes. So I think that was a good thing. And the other thing I remember is that my dad attended events socially, and he was very careful about instructing me that you are a professional 7 days a week. And you will always be the professional 7 days a week. So whether you're at a party, socially, you have to be aware of that and behave accordingly. So I think those messages were good. Now, he was my father. He was very busy. And I have to say, there was very little one-on-one time with any of us, except at the dinner table when we sat around it. But the foremost thing in his mind is all these students who had come from diverse backgrounds, from various areas of India, should be comfortable. And he would be a great mentor to them and very patiently listen to them. So, and he treated each one, my mother used to say, they are like his children. And I think that's a great attitude to have. Like, he wanted them each to feel comfortable and to feel that they could confide in him or talk about certain problems. Nothing would escape his lips. As I said, he was very discreet. So I barely heard anything about anything in my house. So I think I respected all that. And I think if the students that I see today, my class and others, I'm happy to see that they still espouse to those principles of altruism, respect, taking care of the patient, empathy, sympathy. It's just built into the system. And the closeness of the students today. I know my classmate, the class above and class below, and I'm not very friendly or no others than that, because I said I left Bangalore so soon after graduation. But I could see the principles have been embodied in those students, because everyone has read what the internet says and what they have heard and what has been written about. But I think the actual principles I see in the lives of these boys who were so young and when they joined, and now they are well-respected physicians. Many of them, as you know, are Rhodes Scholars and have done extremely well academically. And so I think all of that, but at the same time, they have not lost their sense of direction. So I think that my father's dream would be achieved when he met the students. Then when we moved to America, he came and visited us, and he said, now the college is established. He worked from 1962 to 74. That was the year my daughter was born. So when he came in 82 to our home in Connecticut, he said, the college is on its way. Everything is in place now. Now it's time for the students who have graduated to continue to meet together, and we should have an alumnus. So he called the first meeting at our home in Trumbull, and he invited Tommy Chandy and Willie Gomes, Marian Kamat, Balasundar Reddy, several others. And we all sat in our finished basement, and he said, I think it's a good idea. And Jovita was there. She was very helpful. So we had the first meeting in 80 something. So from then onwards, the alumni, now the North American chapter, the British chapter, I don't know if there's an Australian and the Indian group, they all work together and meet each other. And it's like a bond. And you help the new students who want to get in. So I think the mission is accomplished, and the legacy continues. So that is when the children of many of the physicians who are in my class and other classes, some of them have gone to St. John's and graduated and have done very well there. So I think that it continues. So now my father is retired, and he is now a family man. So we're getting to spend more time with him. And his first grandchild, whom he adored, is our daughter, Michelle Kittleson. He came when I sent her to India for 9 months because I was getting ready for my boards, and my parents willingly accepted the responsibility. My two sisters were still at home, so they all took care of her for a year and then brought her back to us in the United States. Then he came back in 82, and then him and my mother spent a lot of time, because at that time Michelle was the only grandchild. And he spent a lot of time with her, talking to her, reasoning with her, asking her to write about her descriptions of certain travels she made, and so on and so forth. And then came my sister's kids, and then he spent time with them. He lived in Nirmala's home and spent time with her three children. And my middle sister has one child, spent time with them. And he never made favoritism of anyone, but they all had the greatest respect for him and my mom. So I think now when I think about it, I see Michelle. She's now grown up. She's a well-accomplished cardiologist and clinical researcher and guideline committee and editor of this and that, and wrote a book. But whatever it is, she still embodies the things that I see: the humility, love of patients, love of patient care, respect. And I think those are the attributes that she got from exposure to everything that was offered to her with the family around. So, it's a great blessing. Then I met my husband in med school, and we got married, and that's when 71 we came to America, and we started from scratch. And he has done exceedingly well, and he's a very well respected clinician and teacher, and up to this day, he's retired so many years. People still call him and ask him his opinion, the patients, other doctors, colleagues, etc. So, I think it was a job well done. And I have now retired during COVID, but I loved pathology. I still love it. And most of all, I decided I want to give back. So I would give back by reviewing patient care, so that I could be sure. For instance, I dedicated a lot of my personal time for breast cancer to make sure that the breast cancer patients' diagnoses are correct before the next step of treatment is undertaken. So my parents are gone now, but hopefully the memories last, and the values imparted to the generation now, Michelle and my sister's kids, will be passed on to their children, which I do see in Michelle's kids, the way she raises them. So it's a blessing that everything was reinforced, not only in med school, it was reinforced at home. And I just have to say that I thank God for the good fortune of having this wonderful family. It's, of course, with my parents, uncles, aunts, grandparents, friends, and all the friends we connected with because of St. John's. I continue to meet in connection with St. John's. So that is a blessing for me, and I hope other people feel the same. I think there was a class in medical ethics, if I remember, but I couldn't be sure. I think there was, because you see, we were all focused on the main subjects, but I believe there was something to do with medical ethics. So my mother, you correctly said, was a very lively, social, strong personality, and nothing fazed her. So she said, yes, it was difficult, but we accept the challenge. Those were her words. And she supported my dad in everything. So if he had to go around fundraising, she went along with him. If he had to entertain, she did it beautifully in the house. She was a great, and she played the piano, not too much, of course, but she knew how to play the piano. And she was great at throwing cocktail parties and preparing the most exquisite looking hors d'oeuvres. And she was well known for that. And she was very artistic. So she sang beautifully. She used to, in her younger days, sing solo Ave Maria in the church. And she was just a happy person. And she used to always tell us, you have to have a strong backbone because you have to do what is right and enjoy life because, there's always time to be miserable, but nobody cares for you. So she used to always say, sing the song, I want to be happy. And I can't be happy unless you are happy too. I think you know that song. So I was trying to teach them to my grandchildren. And she really espoused to that. So I cannot think of them, nor can Michelle, who's the oldest grandchild, ever talk of them in the singular. They always appear together. So whatever they did together, as I said, they confided in each other. We were not privy to many of the things, which is appropriate. So all the planning, she arranged for me to stay with my friend for a year to make me comfortable. She did a lot of things. And she was very encouraging. Now, she was very autistic, and she was hoping the children would be autistic. So I'm not very autistic, but my youngest sister, Nirmala, she's a graduate of St. John's, is like my mom. She, at the age of 3, she would sit for painting competitions and drawing competitions in the glass house or wherever it was. And they would give all these kids paper and crayons, and she would win the prize. Now she has kept up. She's practicing internal medicine full time, but she loves painting. So she has proceeded to take classes, and she does oil and charcoal, and she does portraits, and she does beautiful cake decorating, and she does play the piano, but not anymore. But that's her love. She just is like, she has inherited that trait from my mom. So I think, having a strong mother, it was a good thing because dad was really quite absorbed in his work. And so she took care of everything, and she insisted that dinner time had to be everyone sat together, and lunch time, Sunday, we all went for mass together. Then we went out to breakfast, and then we came back and had a late lunch together. And everybody sat and talked at the table. So, and her mother was alive, and her family was extremely good to us. So, and my father's side too. So I think, that's what I said. I cannot be ungrateful to my grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, everybody. It was like a huge family, you know, that that was cultivated over time, I think. Yes, because the fundraising, the entertaining, as part of the being in the position Dad was in, all was done in the Alfred Street home. Yes, and so these are my memories till 71. After he retired, and the other important thing my father said is you have to respect the people in your own home because it is easy to take them for granted. But remember, when the chips are down, they are the only ones around you. So I'll never forget that. And he lived it out. He respected my mother. He respected us all. And he said it was not easy sometimes not to lose your temper, but he had trained himself over time not to do it. Because you can't think if you have you're full of anger, it's better to calm down and think carefully before you do. So I did see that level of respect displayed. No different to his family, no different to his friends. Everybody was treated, his in-laws. In fact, my mother's mother, I was the oldest grandchild there in that family too. So she often told me as a little girl, she used to say, you know, your father is a gem. And I never understood what she said, but I do now. For a mother-in-law to say your father is a gem, that means a lot. So now, in retrospect, I understand that it was different. And then when we, came to America and he reached out and made friends here, one of the ladies told me, she was not a doctor, she was just a friend we knew. She said, when your dad enters this room, it is a strange thing. He doesn't open his mouth, but you just see him and you want to respect him because of the way he carries himself and with the patience. And it's unbelievable. And towards the end, he had a lot of pain because he had osteoporosis and some compression fractures of the vertebra, but he never let on. So somebody who visited his house would say, I could see from his hands that he was in pain, but that big smile was always on his face when he welcomed somebody into the home. So for all of those things, it's a good thing that I was exposed to it. So, we talk about mentors in this country and everything, but the mentors, which I did have in this country, but since I had the privilege of having all of them before I came here, I think that was a great asset. And I hope the other students also felt the same way, to have the security that we enjoy at home and in the school. Yes, he was distinctly a gentleman, extremely tall, and he would visit us, and we had visited his home, but he was very well read and he was involved in the history of medicine. So that's as much as I remember of him. And then he donated a prize. I remember that too. So there were him and his wife were very, very nice people and very giving. So yes, that's my recollection of Major General Bhatia.